Welcome, everyone. I'm Dawn with K0 Technologies, and I want to welcome you to our monthly webinar training series. In today's session, we'll look at your choices for linking and sharing data in Excel. What does our session look like? Well, first I'll share with you different options for linking within a workbook. Then we'll explore linking across workbooks. What are those options? Because sometimes we may not have control over each of those data sets, and we may need to connect with data that's in other files. You'll see as well how we can create hyperlinks to other data. In addition, when we're sharing data with other people, it can be useful for us to be working with comments and notes. That is, all of this is about really how we can work effectively together within our teams, whether we're sharing data within our organization or even with people outside of our company. And then protecting your work. You've probably had this happen to you before, where someone has changed something, and even if we might have stressed, it's really important you make a copy of it rather than working with the original, something gets changed. That is, how can we protect your work so that people can access parts of a worksheet, for instance, but not make changes to key elements? Those are all the topics that we will be exploring today in our time together. So let's go ahead. We're going to dig right into and look at this in Excel. So our first example will be how we can link within one workbook. And in this case, it's a pretty simple one. Here we have a summary, and then we have individual worksheets where we have data that we're tracking, in this case for different locations. But this might be how we pull together information for budgets. Maybe we're pulling together information for each month or various offices or categories. And so in this case, each one of these has data that is total. That is certainly not a requirement, but we could summarize it here and even show changes within that. So it's all in one workbook in this case. Creating links here are much easier than often we get the sense of it. Now they can be, we can have use functions, we can have formulas, but for this, I'm simply going to say that this cell is equal to, and I'll move to the Texas sheet. And then in the Texas sheet, here I'll point to where we have the total. So we're simply saying that that cell in the summary is equal to this. And here I have that total. So let's look at what that created. It's a formula where we're saying that this cell is equal to, we have the worksheet name, exclamation point, and then the cell within that worksheet. So should we insert data, like new rows for this, this will adjust as with any other formula that we would have in Excel. Let's repeat that again for Colorado. So this is equal to, once again, I'll move to the sheet for Colorado and point to this cell. And once again for New Mexico. Now, we could also approach it a little differently. What if we didn't have a formula for the total? In this cell, I could say it's equal to, and actually build in a function like sum. It's equal to the sum, and here I'll move to the Oklahoma sheet, highlight those values. So even if I didn't have that total there, I could highlight these values, or I might be creating a calculation of a cell multiplied by another one. So all of those are possibilities. Here I can hit enter, which puts in a closed parentheses, and I get that value there as well. So it just simply changed up the calculation a little bit. I still get the same answer, but I've simply said it's equal to, and I've referenced then once again, creating a link to another location in this workbook. Let's go back to one of our previous calculations. Here I can double click or hit my F2 function key as a way to edit in place. And notice one of the things that's a little different here. What do you see with New Mexico? Well, for this, we have a quote around New Mexico, but we didn't have that in the other ones. So this isn't an error. This is because New Mexico has a space in that worksheet name. So anytime you have a space in a worksheet name, then what happens there is that this will be created as what's called a character string. So you can see, otherwise this would be an error. That is, if we didn't have that, then Excel is going to be looking at this and say, is New Mexico is this text a cell reference, a function name? Is it a range name? And if not, we would get an error. So it automatically does that. And I just mentioned that because sometimes when people are troubleshooting, they might look at that and think that this is actually the reason why something isn't working. And it's actually is something you want to keep. So don't change that. So that is just a little bit of an idea of what we have here. So it's a pretty simple linking. But one of the nice things about that is, should we move to, or should there be changes, whether we make them or somebody else makes them? And notice this current total we have here for Colorado. Well, if one of the values here changes, and it could be a very complex worksheet, most of our examples are simple on purpose, just so that we can focus on the concepts and the skills. And so if this changes, which also changes the total, so notice the change there, it automatically is going to be reflected here, whether or not I'm looking for that or I'm aware of that particular change. So that's one of the things just to know about as we are looking at linking across worksheets, but within one workbook. And those are the basic concepts for them. So whether you use functions or have other kinds of calculations, this can be a great way for you to summarize your information. So that is one approach. Now, another way that we can do linking, it's a little bit more specialized, but let's head over here to another example. We'll look at something called 3D formulas. Now, 3D formulas has certainly some limitations, but it is another way to link. And it may have some applications for you depending upon your data. So think the name itself is kind of descriptive to this idea. With 3D formulas, we're reaching through the different dimensions. So in this case, it's still one workbook, but we have different worksheets. So notice we have north, south, east, west. Now, in each one of these cases, the first one, I reduced the size a little bit so you can see, but each one of these, they all have the same structure. They all have the same data, which means that, for instance, here, all of them have data for pasta, so in cell C8, it's pasta for Q2. That's the key here for 3D formulas to work. So it has some specialized applications, but it is a way for us to create linking. Because rather than having to try to total like we did before where we were summarizing, what we can do is actually bring together that same information into kind of basically a summary sheet. And then should anything change in that, but it is dependent upon the fact that they all have the same structure. So that's something that's a little bit different in terms of working with it. So let's see how we might build a 3D formula.
We simply move here wherever we want to see the formula. So that's like we do anything in Excel, where we move to where we want to see the result. And with that, then we'll say equal to, and in this case, we'll sum, but it could be another function or a different calculation. So this is going to be the sum, and I want to do north through east. North through east. So first, I'll move to the north sheet, click on that first value, and now to select from north through west, hold down my shift key, shift, and click on west. So what I've actually done there now is I've highlighted, and you can see in those worksheet tabs, those are bold, they're lit up, they're activated. And so I've selected that range, and now I'll close paren, or I could just hit enter. And let's see what we just created with this. So it is the sum of north colon west. So we're used to seeing the colon when it's just a range of cells, but it's north through west, exclamation mark, once again, is the divider, and then B5. So that is then in cell B5, in each one of those sheets, sum them together to get me that answer. And that can have some applications then. It's a little bit more specialized, but it might come into play here. And the nice thing about that is because the logic applies to the other cells, I can simply use my fill handle, drag this down, and drag it across. So I'm copying that. That is, if I just grab one of these, for instance, here, it's the sum of north through west and cell E10. So here again, dependent upon having a consistent structure throughout those. Now we can build in our total formulas for those. Now, typically what we would do is we'd move here and create a sum. That is, we could use our auto sum button in the home tab, but we could also use a keyboard shortcut, which is Alt equals. In this case, this is just kind of a little fun trick. It doesn't really apply. Lots of times our projects are more complex than this, but here I've highlighted the ranges where I want to total and where I want to see those answers. And now I'll do that sum formula. Whoops, there we go. Sum formula, Alt equals, and I've got the totals. So you can see lots of different ways to create it. And here's my total, and the other ones fall in place as well. So that's the idea of the 3D formulas and being able to reach through. Now, a little caution on this. Remember that it is north through west. So should the orders of these worksheets change in any way, let's just look, for instance, here, our current total for the first line item, 19,318. If one of these sheets, like south, is moved outside of that range, and I'll just click on this and drag it to the right, notice how that total changed, because it's still showing you north through west, but that's only inclusive now of north, east, and west. So that's one of the things to keep in mind as you're working with these, is that you want to make sure that you don't change the structure of either individual worksheets or the workbook setup as it is. But that's 3D formulas, yet another way for us to link with our data. Let's look then at probably a little bit more common scenario, and that is linking across workbooks. Now, one of the challenges we have with linking is, first of all, it can sound a lot more complicated than it really needs to be. When we're linking across workbooks, the workbooks that we're linking or connecting do not all have to be in the same location. So what I'm going to do here is I'll move to something that looks pretty similar to what we just saw, and that is
a summary, but this summary is reaching out to other workbooks rather than within the same workbook. So this summary is considered to be the destination workbook. That's just the terminology for it. This is where the links will reside. This is where the links will live. Any workbooks that have the original data, those are considered to be source workbooks. And so those are then where we're going to get the data. Now, a destination workbook like this one could also be a source workbook for yet another project or another workbook. And that wouldn't be apparent. That is, if we go to a source workbook, we don't know what might be dependent upon it. So that can be a little bit of a challenge. Well, we can have links across workbooks. So the only requirement now, all the files do not have to be in the same folder, but they all need to be accessible to whoever may be using them. So typically that's going to either be in OneDrive or SharePoint, meaning that it's going to be in a folder or a location where maybe everyone that's on the team has access to it. So you can make a OneDrive location available to other people, but likely it's going to be in SharePoint. So that's one of the things to know. That doesn't have to be all in the same location, but that does need to be accessible. And sometimes you may get things from outside partners, vendors, things like that, that contains a link. And the reason why you can't access the link is because it's something that's internal to their system. So that's one of the things K-Square Technologies can really, help you get all squared away in terms of how your system is set up and help you with the organization of your files and folders. So in this case, then, I want to link to data that's in other workbooks. And I have those already open here. I've customized my quick access toolbar here so that I can just go to switch windows. That's also available under the View tab here and switch windows over on the far right-hand side. So just know that. And if you're curious about how to customize your quick access toolbar, we cover it in some of our other webinars, but you can also check out our YouTube channel where we have a video on that too. So in this case, I already have open Wyoming, Texas, New Mexico, and Colorado. Now, I don't have to always keep those open all the time. I just have them open so that I can set up the links to them. And then from that point forward, they don't have to all be open, even if I have this file open. So that's one of the nice magical things about linking across workbooks. Let's look at how we can do this. So as we saw before, this is equal to, and we're going to keep it simple, but it could be different, more extensive calculations. And now I'll switch over to, and I could use my Windows taskbar for that too, over to Colorado, and I'll simply point to this total and hit enter. So the end result is a little different than what we saw before, because now it's including the name of the workbook. And in this case, then, in square brackets, we have Colorado. We don't see the path right now because the file is currently open. And then the name of the worksheet, so it's just sheet 1, and exclamation. So if this was labeled, then that would be indicated here. And then the location where that currently is. Now, even though this is showing as an absolute reference, that's what the dollar signs are telling us, then that will adjust should we be inserting any new rows, for instance, in that data. Okay, so let's repeat that again for our New Mexico. And once again, we'll point to that. Now, as we saw before, this displays a little differently because of the fact that there's a space in the name. So for this next one, once again, we could have calculations like formulas. So I'll say this is equal to the sum. And even though I do have a total in the Texas, I'll go ahead and just total this range rather than reference that total. So just as a reminder that we have that flexibility. Now there's another way for us to get this link. It's not necessarily faster, it's just different. So for this one, I'm going to actually start from Wyoming, and I'll move over to where the total is. So it's basically where we can paste a link. First, I'll copy. And so for this one, I could do a right click and copy. I'll do a Control C for this. And so Control C for copy. Now I'll move back over to my destination workbook, which is sales summary. And I'll right click. And so here, we could find this in our home tab of our ribbon as well. And here I have different paste options. And the one that I'm interested here is paste link. So go ahead and pick that one. And we have the link. Now notice it just looks very much as the same structure as what we saw before. This doesn't change the end result. It's just a different way. And in Excel, we often have 2, 3, 4, 5 different ways of doing something. Certainly in things like copy and paste, we do. But this just is because we can often see different, we do a search on something, or we are taught something a little differently, and just know that there's another way for us to approach it. So this is what we have so far in building these links. Now, this is only the start of it because we need to know how to manage them. And I'll go ahead here and total this. Remember, Alt equals is our shortcut for creating a sum. So I've got that all squared away here as well. Now let's look at some of the things that can happen as we go back and forth here. Let's say that I save this file and I'm going to close it. So I could close the window. I have close on my quick access toolbar, but here I'll just close the window. Now I'm going to move over to my Colorado sheet. So my sales summary is not currently open. Somewhere along the line, the Colorado sheet has been updated, and maybe somebody else has made changes to this. So let's just say that this is changed here to 10,000. So this value now has changed or increased. Okay? So it's almost 81,000. Now I may not even have the Colorado file open. Let's go ahead and close this one as well, just so that you can see that, that is, maybe it's a team member who's responsible for that one, and then it's somebody else who's responsible for the others. I'm going to go back and grab that sales summary, and let's see what happens. So the first thing here is that you'll get different prompts depending upon what your security settings are set up for. But this is telling us that this workbook contains links to one or more sources. Because external links could be malicious, especially if we're not familiar with the source, then we get this prompt here. So do we want to update or not? Now, first of all, notice the Colorado figure here. If we say don't update, this will stick. In this case, I'm going to say update. And notice how that changes. And any of the other values would change as well. So that's one of the things that can happen. We also might see a security warning that says that the automatic update of links has been disabled, and that we have the option to enable the content. So it just kind of depends upon what the settings and how it works with it. But just know that you have that. It's always good to kind of pause and make sure that these are appropriate links with that. So that's one of the things that, will happen as well. Not only does it recognize that there are links, but whether or not you want to update it as well. So let's look at how, I'll share with you as well how we can know how to manage these links. Where is this information as well? And you'll find this then in our data tab. And here over on the left-hand side in the queries and connections group is edit links. Now, if this is grayed out, then that means that the active workbook does not have links in it.
But for this one, we'll go into the edit links. And then this way we can kind of see, what do these look like? So you'll notice currently, because the Colorado file is not open right now, it is shown as a remote file. The other ones are. And we see the path for those as well. And so each one of these, we're seeing that there are 4 files that we were linked to at this point. Now I can move to one of those, for instance, and just, if I wanted to choose update values, and it would show me that that was okay, even though that file is not currently open. I could move to another and check the status. And see, so see here, it's just checking the status, and you can see that as well. So that is just to where we can kind of see what is linked or what is connected. Now I'll go ahead and close this for just a moment. There are some things that can happen. That is, if a file gets moved or renamed, then the links may no longer work, or they may work in a way that is unexpected. So let's say that if the sales summary here is open, in this case, and now I move to my Wyoming file. What if I decide, I'd like to make a copy of this to maybe for next month's data, or maybe for next year's data. Maybe I want to do something completely, I want to take that structure, but do something different with it. So for this, I'm going to save as, and I can go to File, Save As. I've got that option in my Quick Access toolbar, and I'll just call this Wyoming 2024, for instance, okay? Really not think much about that. In fact, maybe I'll close that, or maybe I do other work with it, but as I'm working with that. So my intention in making that copy was for a different or separate purpose. But let's see what happens here. If I go to Data, Edit Links, because my sales summary was open at the time, what happened is it actually assumed and changed the links over to this 2024 file. And that may not be my intention at all. And that can be where we can run into problems. So it's really good for us to audit and monitor this, because really, I don't want it to point to that file. I want to still have it continue to be feeding from the original. So how do I change that? How do you fix it? Well, we go to Edit Links here. I select it, and I'm going to change the source. So this is what you can do anytime either a file gets moved or it gets renamed. Anytime you have those kinds of issues, that can be problems with that, or you see that it's not connecting to that. So I'll change the source and point it back to the file that I want, which is my original Wyoming one. So these might not even be in the same folder. But now this has been fixed, and you can see it's been updated. So now it's pointing to that original. Now let's go ahead and look at this for a minute. This is a pretty long path. You can see a little bit easier here up in the formula bar. So if the file is not currently open, then we will see the entire path here in the formula bar. And you can see it's pointing to SharePoint, my documents, my location. And it has also, this is kind of helpful based upon what I mentioned before. Notice there's a single quote around this entire statement. It's showing it as a character string. So that's not something to delete. That is just part of that naming convention. So that is another piece there in terms of working with it. Just, it's good to know, first of all, how to manage the links and how to make changes to that. And know as well, that is, if we move to one of these sheets, so let's say we go to the Texas sheet,
And if I insert a new row, I can put in values there, but now this total is in cell I8. Let's go back to my sales summary for that. And this is, did not update as expected there, but it's still pointing to that. So we might need to do some updating on that as well. Oh, that's right, because I did a sum on that. It did update. I have to keep track of all the things that I do, because I did have a sum from I2 to I7. So that's what I did with the Texas one. Always good just to be, not to have it be confusing, but to just check that out. Now, at some point, we may no longer want these links. So how do we fix that? That is, maybe we want to capture it. It's the end of the quarter. It's the end of the year, whatever that might be. We may want to still have this ongoing project, but we want to be able to capture what it was at a specific point in time. So that's where we can break the links. So the first thing I'm going to do here is, because I want this project to still be active, this is saved, but now I'm going to save it as, and I'll call it, in this case, sales summary final. It might be, third quarter, 2023, whatever it might be. So the original is still there with the links. But for this version, especially if I want to share it externally, or I want to make sure that it's showing what were the values when we wrapped up that quarter. In this case, then we'll go to Edit Links, and I want to remove the links. So we'll select whether or not the files are open. That's not important. Here I click on the first one and I'll select the last one. So that's all you need to do, is just select all of these. You could do them individually, but it's a lot easier to select them as a group. Click on the first, Shift, click on the last. And now we'll break link. And it's going to warn you. That's why we saved it under a different file name. Notice there are no files listed here anymore, and we close. So what happened? Well, now we get the raw data. We have the values there, and they are capturing it at that particular point in time. Notice under the data tab here, Edit Links is no longer available because we no longer have links within this workbook. So that's an overview of how you can link across workbooks and be able to create these kinds of projects to give you a way to be able to work with data that's coming from a lot of different sources. So hopefully that gives you some ideas and some inspiration in terms of working with it. Other things that come up for us as we're working in Excel is often that we have multiple people working within the same files. So there may be, they may not be working in the same time. If they are, that's called co-authoring, and that's available if the file is shared either through OneDrive or SharePoint. And so know that, for instance, if I wanted to share this file for someone else to edit it, one of the ways we can do that is simply to make it available to our team, let's say through Teams. Or I'd have the ability to use my share options here too. So as long as the file is in OneDrive or SharePoint, I can share it. But it may not always be necessary that people are working on it at the same time, but that I want to make sure that I can preserve the integrity of the data as other people may be opening up this file. So that's where we look at protecting. How do we protect our work? So in this case, well, I'll just use a really simple example. Most of my examples are purposely simple just because we want to focus on the concepts here. So this is an example where perhaps you have a form or you have something that multiple people are populating, but you don't want them to be able to insert new rows or change formulas or change headings, things like that. So that's where protection comes in. One of the things that's helpful to know, every cell has a protection property already enabled. So I'll just move to a random cell here, and I can right click and choose Format Cells. I can also use a keyboard shortcut, Control-1. And then let's look at the tab here for protection. So it wouldn't have mattered which one I picked. By default, every cell has this property locked enabled. But notice the description. Locking cells doesn't have any effect until you protect the worksheet. So if we protected the worksheet now, it means all the cells would be locked. We're going to change that up a little bit. I want people to be able to change these data cells, but not the formulas around them. And I don't want them to be able to change the headings, things like that. So I'll select the range that they have access to. And now let's go back to Format Cells. So mention Control-1 or right click and Format Cells. Those are both good options for us. And here under protection, I'll uncheck locked, but just for those cells. And okay. Yet we still haven't done anything yet until we apply the protection. And it doesn't matter what I have highlighted when I do this next step. We'll go to Review, Protect Sheet, and notice that right now, allow users of this worksheet too. I'm only going to let them just select those cells. But we can see here, do you want them to be able to apply any formatting? Do you want them to be able to insert or delete rows or columns? You decide. But for this, I'm going to be pretty restrictive. Now, the next step is, do you want to apply a password? So this adds another level of protection. There's good and bad parts of this. Typically because we have to remember the password. So it's not, we don't want to pick something that's personal to us. It's not our login password. It's simply a password to protect or unprotect the sheet. That also means that you have to keep in mind that Caseware Technologies or, it's not, or other support is not going to be able to fix this for you. It's helpful if you choose to use a password that you may select something. First of all, it's separate from any other more important security passwords. This is simply just to kind of add another, it's like putting a lock on the door, just so it makes it a little bit harder for people to access it. And it's usually just because it's unintentional changes people are making. So if you do a password, it should be something likely that you have in your team. You say, okay, we're protecting this worksheet so that people that are in this other department or anyone else in the organization, they can't easily make changes to it. So you just have an agreed upon password. That way, if there are changes to people in that team, we don't have the challenge of being able to access it. So that's my speech on that. So I'm going to put in a password for this, be asked to enter it again. And now what this means, if a user comes in and they move to a cell and start typing, they'll be told that they can't. And notice to make a change, unprotect the sheet. Well, it won't take very long to do a search that you would be able to find out how to unprotect. But now if they move to one of these cells, they can make changes there. But notice in the Home tab here, this is where we have most of our editing and formatting actions. Notice these are all grayed out. None of these are available I can't format the cells. If I did a right click here, notice that most of those options aren't available. So it's very restrictive. And that might be exactly what you need to do or want to do in that case. So that's the idea of protection, to be able to limit who has access to it. At any time you want to then reverse that, you certainly have the option to do that under the Review tab. Another piece that we have as well, when we're sharing data, sometimes it might be, it's kind of a variation here of linking, and that is working with hyperlinks. So we're familiar with hyperlinks, for instance, here. So if you were just typing, and remember in the protection, that was only for that one worksheet. It wasn't for all these other worksheets. So here, if I'm typing in an email address, okay, notice what happens. By default, it becomes a hyperlink. This would be the same thing as a web address. It might change color, it might change font, but that is the default. Now that might be exactly what you want. That's automatically set there. But did want to just address the fact that you have the option if you want to. Maybe you have a project where you have you're doing a lot of these entries and you simply would like to be able to, you don't want that to happen or don't want that to be a clickable link. That can be really helpful. But you notice editing of this is a little bit more difficult. It's easier if we move to it and then go to the formula bar so that we're not accidentally clicking on it. So if you ever want to turn off the linking or the hyperlinks temporarily, you can still create hyperlinks, but you do it a little differently. So just let me walk you through that real quickly too. We find that under File, Options. She says so confidently. Well, for whatever reason, it's not taking us into that very quickly, so that's okay. You can go to File, Options, and then there is an option to take you into proofing. So let's see if I can get another backdoor into my options here. Yeah, it decided that it just doesn't want to behave today. So File, Options, then you can go to Proofing, choose Auto Form. Then what you're going to do from that proofing is choose Autocorrect Options. And then finally, I know it's a lot of steps, but I'll just walk you through that. Auto Format as you type is the tab for that. And then you're able to uncheck an option called Internet and Network Paths with Hyperlinks. Not a big deal in this case, but it is just something where you can know that you can turn it on or turn it off. So it's under Auto Format as you type in working with that. Let's look a little bit more with hyperlinks. Sometimes we might want to have a hyperlink to share data with people, share other aspects. It might be a Word document, maybe it's a PDF, maybe it's something that maybe it's processes and procedures. So let's just look at that idea here. Oh, forgot I need to turn off my protection here because otherwise I won't be able to type. So I'll unprotect my sheet. And let's just say that this could be a PDF. This could be for an onboarding document, any number of things. I've first of all created the text that I want to create for that hyperlink. Now, to create this link, I can either find it under Insert and Link or Control K. That's another way, Control K. So what this does is, here's the text that I typed. click to learn more about Hawaii. And I want to link it to, so it could be that I want it to link it to a particular web address so that I could type that in, or maybe as part of my history. In this case, I'll select it and have it go to a document. Now, we want to make sure that that document or PDF is in an accessible place. It's in a place where any users, anyone who might be working with that, would be able to find it. But in this case, we'll say it is. So now I've created this. And now let's see how that link works. I can make this as a clickable link. And it will, in this case, it's going to open up that file. And we'll just say that it does. I don't want it. Okay, we're not going to go through all of that. You know, you can see that we've got some good protection that's in place. So that's the idea then, that you can create that hyperlink. Now, let's look at a quick example of another kind of link. Remember our coffee file where we had these, in this case, these are worksheets here. Now, keeping in mind, we can have over 1,000 worksheets in one workbook. I'm not recommending that, but it could be, you know, that if you have 10, 15 or more worksheets, that can be a little bit cumbersome to navigate. One possibility within a larger project is actually create a table of contents sheet at the front end of a project. And especially if this was budgets, maybe links to the different departments, things like that. So what does that look like? Well, imagine that I want this to be, and you can see it'd be very easy just to navigate to those individual sheets. But let's say here I want to create a link to that texture sheet. Well, I'll do a Control K. And now this is a little bit different for inserting a hyperlink. In this case, what I'll do, it says place in this document. And then I'll actually, if there are any range names, I could use those as well. Where do I want it to go? A1 is just fine, but we could change that location. And so for this, I've created a hyperlink, and I'll do one more. I'll pick a location that's a little further over there, Control K, but I could do that for each one of these. And then certainly format them so that they would match what I already have here. So in this case, I could still make them all, you know, the same size, bold, etc. But that becomes the table of contents for that. So that becomes interesting. Let's see how this works. So here I could use this to go right to the Oklahoma sheet. And I even could have a link set up here to take me back to that table of contents for the summary. But that's another way that we can apply hyperlinks and to work with that. So lots of different ways for us to make it easier to share data. Now, when we're sharing data, we also might want to make sure that we're communicating any important changes, maybe things that don't necessarily lend themselves to a separate comments or notes area. So in Excel, we have comments and notes, which both have some different strengths to them. The notes feature is what used to be comments. That is, comments were just, here you see an example of the notes feature here. I don't have to move to that cell. I could just hover over it. And if it doesn't pop up here, we'll go ahead and go to review here and go to notes, and I'll just say show all notes because I want that to be popped up. So a note then is just a way to provide an explanation. It could be an explanation for why a particular cell is different than expected. It could be provide an explanation for a particular column heading, anything that would be useful there, and it becomes a really easy thing to do. So I could simply move to a cell, right click, and say new note. Okay. Now, these can be sized. We can format the content inside of them, make that larger, for instance, more readable. That is always a possibility there. That is a note. And as I did before, it's under review. So here's notes, and we could see that we could edit the note. And I did show all notes. So these are just quick, as the name implies, notes for that. Now, comments. Now, this has been shifted so that now comments allow for threading, meaning that we can have it be a lengthier, if I hover over this. So remember, the notes are this little red corner. Comments is a little bit more of a purplish tab on that. And when I hover over this, notice it's a threaded conversation. This means that different people in the organization can contribute to this. And you can see here that I could continue to add to this. Whatever I want to add to that piece and to put that in there. But the threaded means that we have a little bit more. We also have the ability to manage that comment. We could resolve that, say, okay, that's been fixed. We can see what happened. I could even delete it if I wanted to. But I could say that we've resolved that because we've updated that. I could show all comments. And so now this is coming into a comments pane. We can navigate between those. So those are options we have under the review tab. And these are ways for us to further communicate with other team members, for instance, in terms of what's possible or what we're working with. So just a little bit of a distinction between notes and comments. Another piece that we have in working with that. Let's go ahead and then wrap up with a couple other options for sharing data and working with it. And one of those is here again, when we're if we are working with and have multiple people that are touching this data, one of the things that we might want to do as well is to control what people are allowed to enter in. And that is something called data validation. So it is also, lends itself primarily to where there's multiple people working with the data. So let's just say, for instance, that we have these different departments. And so right now we've got these 4 departments. We don't want people to choose from anything other than those 4 departments. So that becomes then something where we can limit what people are allowed to type in. Okay, so that's the idea with data validation. So first of all, I'm going to select where I want to apply that. And I'll simply move to the first cell here, hold down Shift and Control down. So that is highlighting. I don't want to select the entire column. Now, why that's dangerous is that if you select the entire column, even though it might seem more efficient, the problem is that now there's data in every cell all the way down to past row 1 million. And if you do that, then you will not be able to insert new rows because you have maxed out the range of that worksheet. So be real careful with something like data validation. Although it might seem logical just to select the entire column, then you're going to run into problems later, and it may not be obvious to you why that's happened. So in this case, then, I've selected the range. And now I'll go ahead and we'll move to data. And here is data validation. So I'm simply going to click on that option here. And there's a lot of things you can do with data validation. It's definitely something worth exploring. That is, not only can you limit what people can put in, so, maybe you're going to say it can only be dates, or it can be text at a certain length, or it can only be whole numbers, all of these things. But we can also apply an input message. So here I could put in apartment and say, please choose from drop-down list. And I could even have an error message. Well, let's build on those settings. So for this one, I want it to be a list. And that list could exist in another worksheet. For this one, I'll simply say it's equal to, and I'll just say widgets. I actually don't need to say equal to, because widgets, gadgets, and I'm going to put it in the order that I'd like it to appear. So you could change that alphabetical order or whatever you want. So I've simply created this list and say, okay. That's pretty straightforward. Now, what does that mean? Notice here, I click to a cell. Here's my input message. Please choose from drop-down list. Here are my choices. This can be really helpful when you're sharing data with other people, especially when you're analyzing, you're doing sorting and filtering. You may be creating pivot tables, and the challenge is you have inconsistency of data entry. So data validation is a great way for you to be able to improve that. And notice if I type in something different here, this is where I'm going to get an error message. And this is one of the things that we could build in the data validation, because this isn't very friendly. And you could say, for instance, only valid options are in the drop-down list, for instance, and now I can then pick one of those. So that's the idea then of data validation. Those are all ways for us to be able to more effectively link and share data. I hope this has been really helpful for you to get some options for how you can work with Excel data with other people. We invite you as well to join us for our upcoming webinar training schedule. And we offer these once a month on the second Tuesday of each month. So coming up to wrap up 2023, we have a two-part session on working with Microsoft Excel top essential functions. And this is where you can really get to understand some of the key functions that are available in Excel and get an opportunity to see how those behave and what would be the best solutions for you. Thank you for joining us today as we explored your choices for linking and sharing data in Excel. Please let us know, how can we help you to be more productive? Please reach out to K-Square Technologies so that we can support you with IT services and consulting. Thanks so much for joining us today.